It's a process, but the process requires some level of pain, but you have to know that that pain goes away. But it's just an opportunity to go ahead and take a little bit more on. That kind of represents the transition from Nickelodeon to BET, and then certainly the one from that being anchored in traditional television to digital was even a bigger jump to make, but one I felt that I needed to make.
I'm Sam McKenna, and you're listening to the Show Me You Know Me show, a deep dive on the impact of personal connection and empathy from the perspective of some of the world's most successful executives. Our guest today is Nelson Boyce, Managing Director at Google. Hi, everyone. Our guest today is Nelson Boyce, a Managing Director at Google who leads travel industry advertising and marketing relationships in the Central and Eastern U.S. Before joining the company, Nelson was the Senior Vice President of East Coast Media Sales for BET Networks, and before that, Senior Vice President of Ad Sales Strategy and Marketing at Nickelodeon. In these roles, Nelson's been able to influence the development of short-term and long-range sales strategies and plans, and help secure opportunities for successful new lines of business. Also noteworthy, Nelson graduated from Harvard University and serves as the executive sponsor of the Atlanta Black Googler Network chapter. And believe it or not, he got a start in finance. I love this episode so much because I could have probably talked to Nelson for another 49 hours just on the slight things he gave us here. I can't wait to dive in and show you guys what he's all about. All right, so Nelson, you have had, I think, what is probably an enviable career. If I look at the logos that you worked at, you've worked at MTV, BET, Nickelodeon, and now you're at Google. And I just think what an incredible trajectory you've had. And we're going to get into that. But you started as a dream job, maybe, of a financial analyst, and then said, maybe not so much. What prompted the shift to leave from that and then into a sales career?
Well, it's funny. The real reason I was in finance was because I paid my way through college. And so I had student loans that I needed to pay. But I learned a lot in that 2 years as a financial analyst, and I was in mergers and acquisitions. In M&A, you're either constructing or deconstructing companies. So you really see and learn how companies operate. And there was an element ultimately that wound up being transferable of sales, right? Like at the end of the day, if you're constructing or deconstructing, how do I take these elements and present them to investors in a way that makes them either valuable or attractive for them to purchase? There was always kind of an element of sales and salespersonship, if you will, that was intriguing to me as a function of that role. I grew up in a media household. My dad was a career journalist. The importance of information and what that means for people has always been important. And while I didn't wind up being on the content side of things, certainly the notion of sales in and of itself was intriguing, very entrepreneurial, one where you could take a lot of ownership in what it was that you were doing. You can see your work manifested in results. And being a type A personality and someone who likes to be solution-oriented and to help others, sales seemed the right lane for me to go in. So again, finance wasn't the end goal or really the primary mission, but it was one that led itself through exploration to other places. And it's been sales ever since for me.
Wait, this is so cool about your dad. He was a journalist. So what kind of reporting did he do? What did he write about?
He started his career at the Chicago Tribune. So if I'm not mistaken, he may have been the first Black reporter ever at the Chicago Tribune. Then he went from there to Time Inc., Time Magazine specifically, where I know for a fact he was the first Black correspondent they ever had, then the first Black bureau chief. And then ultimately, when we wound up in New York, he left Time to join the Wall Street Journal as one of their senior editors. So Dad's a big idol of mine, probably many others as well, but really kind of set the foundation for me in terms of what great looks like and the work that needs to be put in order to play at a high level.
I think one thing you said back about the financial analyst piece that was interesting to me, right? You kind of thought about how do I pitch? How do I kind of bundle story, tell these solutions, right, to make them attractive to other people? And that's kind of where there is that sales angle. There's that marketing angle. But something else that's interesting, like you are type A, you're solution oriented. And for me, which it kind of sounds like it was the same for you, when I got into sales, I never had any formal sales training whatsoever. I had a great CEO.
I didn't either.
See, and you go on to be really successful. But I think there's a thread to this. And I
Yes.
think it's the solution piece you mentioned, right? When I got into sales, my lens on what sales is changed so quickly when I got this great piece of advice from a peer who said, if you think about showing up to calls as a reason, as a way to solve a challenge, not to sell something, your mindset of what sales will be will change.
Look, I agree. And the reality is there's a lot of salespeople out there, right? And there's a lot of salespeople with a lot of actually really great solutions, great products, great things to sell. I think what differentiates a salesperson from the next is their ability to create relationships. You do it really through taking the time to understand what that individual who's sitting on the other side of the table, what they are trying to achieve, what is their business goal, what is their business objective, what is their marketing objective. And to your point, like, hey, what are the types of discovery questions that I need to ask to really understand what they're trying to achieve? What is their desired outcome? And how can I either amplify those things, be the connective tissue between where they are and where they want to be, and, help to guide them through those things. And that requires understanding. Ultimately, those who do well earn the right to be called a trusted partner. That requires time and iteration, but I think you only do that by showing a level of commitment to their success. And I think you earn that commitment by showing your full understanding and depth and breadth of how their business operates and how what they do is connected to all of that.
So I don't want to put words in your mouth here, but are you saying that if we show them we know them, that we're going to have an easier time building trust, of earning that right, and continuing the conversation as a trusted partner?
Yes, and you're not putting words in my mouth. It's probably said much simpler than the way I said it, but that's, the key to it. It's very easy to say no to someone that you don't have a relationship with. It's very easy to say no to someone who's simply a from line in an email. You show them that you know them by a number of different things that do require work, but they're critically important, right? Did you listen to the last earnings call where they were laying out the challenges and opportunities of the business? Were there nuggets within that you could extract as a point of conversation that displays and shows your knowledge of the machinations of the organization? Did you read the 10K? Did you read the industry newsletter or business update on what is going on? Did you attend the last conference where said person presented and what they may have said or didn't say? Do you know how that person is evaluated? Do you know what they're on the hook for? Do you have a sense of the mapping of the stakeholder ownership that exists within their company, right? What levels of influence does that person need to have over other individuals or with other individuals within the company? If we're talking about a chief marketing officer, they're beholden potentially to a number of people. Maybe it's a chief technology officer. Maybe it's a chief financial officer. How can you help that person make the claim that they probably need a bigger budget? How do you help them be seen as a profit center and not a cost center? The list goes on, but the point is, have you done the work in order to be seen as the someone who knows me, if you will? Show me you know me. Those are the types of things that I think are absolutely fundamental in trying to separate yourself from other salespeople who, yes, have good solutions and good products, equally as much in some cases, but these are the types of things that may compel that person to want to work with you versus someone else.
I think I'm just going to close the podcast here because that was just a beautiful masterclass in the sales process that I think for so many listening, light bulbs are going to turn on for things that they've never thought about. And I know questions are going to pop up in their brain to say, okay, but how do I figure that out? How do I ask those questions? How do I earn the right to say who else is part of the sales process? But one thing I want to really focus in on that you highlighted, how are they compensated? How are they recognized? How are they evaluated? At the end of the day, the buyers that you're speaking to, those core decision makers and the influencers too, they're working with you. They're looking to solve a challenge for a particular reason because it's part of either what they've been tasked to do, what they have goals around, what they have KPIs around, et cetera. So you have to figure out how your solution or your services or your product impacts the things that they are then evaluated for, how it gets them to their goals. So I think also understanding that so you can speak their language, right, is critical. That's all part of
listen, it always needs to be in the customer language. At the end of the day, you want the agreement, if you will. And in many cases, the notion of having a joint business plan with a partner is critical. One, you want to make sure that you have properly articulated in their language what the business objective is and what the marketing objective is. It's almost like being in court, right? We're just going to stipulate the facts. If these are the facts of the issue and the desired outcomes of where they want to be, and that could be any number of business metrics, because you want to know those too, because you'll try to figure out how you can bring your things to bear in service of that goal. If you are then applying the tools that you have in your toolbox to being able to be in service of making those accomplishments with sound metrics and with time-bound accountability, and you're doing a quarterly business check-in to say, hey, we're good on this could use some work, or we're really falling behind on this, it creates joint accountability. And it's less of a sell, and it's more of like, hey, we're partners. Like at the end of the day, you never want to be seen through the lens as being a vendor. Vendors can come and go. I can hire and fire vendors, but if you're a partner, right, this is actually someone who understands my business, comes to the table, is putting in an equitable amount of risk that I feel like I'm taking. That's a partner, right? And I think they're going to be far more engaged in that way than they would be otherwise.
What's really key here is that in order to be the most successful type of seller, that challenger seller, you have to build those relationships. And I think this has always been key to your career, right? I think you somehow just get people. How did that help you make the jump to MTV? How did it help you make the jump to Nickelodeon?
There's three things that are part of that. There's the self-awareness piece, right? There is the external piece, which is relationships that may exist on the client or partner side. And then there's the internal relationship piece. And both of those, by the way, are anchored in some level of networking, mentorship, and sponsorship. So on the self-awareness side, I think there's the notion of the friction that exists between being comfortable and uncomfortable. I think any point at which I got comfortable, it was generally a good sign or flag that I should probably be thinking about doing something different. When I think about the history of people, there has never been any economic, social, or technological change that has ever come out of people being comfortable with their situation, right? There's always some level of need or disruption to take it to a different level. And so if you look at my trajectory within sales, first having started in magazines, then having gone into television, and ultimately then into digital, there are very specific points in time for which my comfort level was too comfortable, and I needed to push myself to do something different and take something on. On the relationship side of the equation, I say never burn bridges, because you never know when you got to get back over the river. And you never know who's going to become what. Like, I'm back in the day, I'm talking to media planners, account people, media buyers. Some of those friends that I had in the very beginnings of my career are literally now CMOs of major companies, right? And by the way, across multiple industries. And so while in my career at the moment, I only focus on travel, I've got people in the consumer packaged goods space. I've got people in the financial space. I've got people in the entertainment space. I've got people in food and beverage space. All people that I've come up with in this industry and maintain those relationships over time with, such that I even have colleagues who say, Nelson, I heard you know the CMO over at X company. Can you make an introduction? Making sure that you've got a foundation of good relationships and thinking about how you show up ultimately serves you over time, regardless of whether you're dealing with those people on a daily basis or at some point you need to come back to them. On the internal side of things, I think it's a question of the notion of sponsorship and mentorship. That expands to the external as well. But mentorship is where you have a very kind of what I would consider to be an intimate relationship with someone who is really invested in you, and the value that you're ultimately getting from them, they're also getting back from you. And they're a person who you can confide in, have a very trusting relationship, and someone who's pouring their knowledge into you. A sponsor doesn't need the intimate relationship, but a sponsor may be someone who is familiar with the work that you do and may be a voice for you in rooms you cannot be in, right? As an advocate or as an evangelist for your career. While it's super important to have those people internally, they can exist externally as well in both the mentorship and sponsorship form. And then it's important in many cases to have those people exist externally as well, because they will bring a perspective that is so, it's not myopic. Everyone's a client. How about that? Let's think about it like that. You are ultimately selling all of the time. When I look back at my career, from the best managers to those I would have considered the worst managers, there were always learnings. In some cases where you had a bad experience, those are actually the most impactful.
Yeah.
Because you have a really good sense of the things you do not want to do or the things you do not want to replicate. You kind of cherry pick from both of those entities, the good and the bad, the things that are most important for you, and then go forth with good intent to be able to share those things or act so in a way that you feel is going to be the most impactful for not only yourself, but for your teams. I think it's massively important for people to ask themselves why. And when you think about, again, this notion of vendor versus partner, one's ability to lean in and to try to really create a level of authenticity, a level of empathy, a level of caring and transparency is truly at the core of doing good business. Because at the end of the day, business is about people.
And when you think of it that way, you're in a much better position to achieve your goals. You have numbers to hit, yes, but those numbers are human beings with personalities and needs and challenges and frustrations. They're just like you and me, and we should approach that in that way. I want to think about when you made that transition from Nickelodeon, SVP, wonderful career there. Was it at that point where you're like, you know what? I'm comfortable. I need to push myself, challenge myself. When you made the leap from Nickelodeon to BET, tell us about that transition.
You know, I look back on my former Viacom, now Paramount career. It was tremendous and certainly have many friends from that time in my life before. But it was about being uncomfortable. Being at Nickelodeon, started a new business, then went on to running our digital portfolio, and then did ad sales strategy and business development. The BET opportunity, you talk about making a move completely away from kids, now to adults in terms of audience and niche audience, in particular with BET, right? Where there was certainly a cultural element. And BET is such a spectacular brand and it means so much to so many people. And so does Nickelodeon, but it just does in a different kind of way. And I thought that my opportunity to try to contribute to continuing to develop that brand and what that brand means in the eyes of not only consumers, but in terms of advertising partners was a really big opportunity. And certainly it caused me to have to stretch different muscles and do different things. I mean, I liken this notion of get comfortable being uncomfortable with going to the gym. When you first start the gym, it always sucks. Your muscles hurt. You're like, oh my God, do I really have to do this? And then there are thresholds, right? You find that there are thresholds over time. Like okay, you've been at it for 2 weeks now. You feel a little bit better. And guess what? You're ready to slap 2 new plates on the sides of the dumbbell or the bar.
The 2.5 ones, right? The 2.5 pounds. Yeah.
to lift even more weight, right? And so it's a process, but the process requires some level of pain, but you have to know that pain goes away. But it's just an opportunity to go ahead and take a little bit more on. That kind of represents the transition from Nickelodeon to BET, and then certainly the one from that being anchored in traditional television to digital was even a bigger jump to make, but one I felt that I needed to make. Not only reading the tea leaves in terms of the overall media ecosystem and landscape, but one that I thought was just going to be much more important as marketers thought about measurement and the depth of that measurement and accountability and just user behavior.
Just 2 final questions for you. And I think especially for people who are kind of on the sales mindset, I want to ask you one tangible advice that you might have for our sellers, right? So when you think about mistakes sellers make when they're trying to get your attention, when they're trying to sell to you, what do you see that sellers are maybe missing these days? What piece of advice would you give them to really stand out and to be better?
We captured it early on in this conversation, right? Do the work to understand where they are and where they're trying to go. And then do your best through discovery, through asking difficult questions, perhaps, through demonstrating some level of knowledge. Because even in the demonstration of knowledge, you may get a response that says, I appreciate the fact that you looked into that. That's actually not right. So let me tell you what said thing is, right? Like an opportunity to proffer something up. It could be supported or it could be changed, right? So just do the work in terms of preparation, which is probably 90% of the battle. The rest of it actually becomes easy.
One just final question, and it's a question we ask all of our guests, but being that we pride ourselves on show me, you know me, on doing that research, on finding ways to creatively connect with executives, especially to stand out, in their inbox from the 50 other emails that are probably already in your inbox, Nelson, from our time here today. How does one go about just cold outreach? How do they get a meeting with you? What do they do to stand out?
There's a value in the provocative nature of either a question or a statement, which lends itself to the notion of why said person should care. It can be an industry observation, it could be a statistic, it could be a question, but that gets right to the core of like garnering someone's attention. That should be enough to get somebody to open something. Once they've done that, then there's the conversation around, well, now that you understand why it is you should probably care, here's what I think you should do about it, right? Or here's my suggestion of that about, how I think you could win. Now that I've got you to care and now that I've told you what I think you should do, here's what I believe the impact will be if you actually do it. Oh, and by the way, here are some examples of how it's worked for other people in your industry, other people in your category. Those have been the types of things I have either opened up or wanted to delve deeper into, or certainly the things that have gotten my own clients' attention a bit more.
We have to teach, right? We have to do that research. We have to teach. Here's what we can do. Here's a point of view. Here's something you may not have considered. Here's how your peers are doing exactly this. And then I think one of the just beautiful kickers in those emails too is to think about so what, or to think about the hidden or forthcoming objection. So maybe we say, we can train your teams on this. And the buyer thinks, well, we already have someone who does that. We have to think about what those most common objections are. Get around it in that first email because the buyer aren't, right? 100%. They're not going to write back and object.
And by the way, acknowledge and appreciate those objections. Yep. With empathy, I see how you might feel that way. And then there's a transition.
Exactly. That's when you begin to move from a no to a yes and get around that objection. Nelson, I cannot overstate how much I appreciate having you, especially hearing from somebody with your logos, your background, the caliber of the experience you've had. Really such a treat for us. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
So as you can see, Nelson really speaks my language. That conversation made my day. A few things I took away from it. First, as a seller, no matter how big of a brand you're representing and no matter how much experience you've accrued, you have to take the time to do show me you know me right. You have to do substantial research to truly understand your buyer if you want them to give you their business. Even coming from brands like MTV or BET or Google, that's what a winning game plan looks like. Second, the time to make a move is when you're comfortable. Don't coast along. Don't feel like life is going your way because it's easy. That's when you need to make a change and push yourself. That's how you get to the next level, at least if you're Nelson. It's all about getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. Finally, treasure your relationships with everybody. You just never know who can help you and who you can help back. On to Sam spills. First question comes from Jenny in Washington, D.C. What are some practical show me you know me tips for email subject lines? What I want you guys to think about here is what an executive's inbox looks like. And if you want a sneak peek at that, just go to your own email, pop over to your spam folder, and that's probably what it looks like. For all the spam we get, there's tons of email that gets through and goes right to those executive inboxes, which means your executives are probably getting 20, 30, 50 sales emails every single day. So how do we stand out? Think about what those subject lines look like in your spam box and think about what would stand out to you. At samsales, we always advise two things. One, you can still keep it short, but make sure that that subject line looks really funky and that it makes no sense to anybody except to the person reading it. Second, think about how plus signs can be a cool way to differentiate. So putting those two things together, if you went to my LinkedIn profile and did some research on me, you'd find a couple of things. Well, you'd find a whole heck of a lot of things, but you'd find that I'm originally from Switzerland, that I've had a lot of speeding tickets, that I love Show Me You Know Me, that I love Barefoot Contessa, if you happen to know who she is. Who doesn't, right? But if you sent me an email that said something like Lausanne, Switzerland, where I'm originally from, plus Barefoot Contessa, who I know and love, plus your company name, I would see that email and be like, two things I know and love. One thing I don't know this company, I don't know this brand potentially, but I can tell that this person has done their research, so let me open up this email and at least find out what it's all about. Now, we can talk about the email, but what I would tell you is we're fighting for that very first thing, which is the open. And if you invest the time in doing just that, you will significantly up your odds that that email will in fact get opened. Next one is from Leo in Bakersfield, California. What's the most common mistake you see sellers make on discovery calls? Oh gosh. So a couple of things. One, the way that we start that call, right? The rapport building that we do, it's either not there or we're lazy and we haven't done our research. So we rely on the weather. Now, if you are listening from the UK or if you are a Brit, don't hate on me because I know we talk about the weather quite a bit. If we are from over there, it is a cultural, important thing to discuss. But for everybody else, be better than the weather. If you've ever seen Crazy Stupid Love and you know Ryan Gosling says, be better than the gap, be better than the gap, be better than the weather here. What I want you to think about for that rapport building is bring in the research you've done. If you were going to meet that executive at a conference and you knew that they were going to come to your networking happy hour and you were going to get the chance to talk to them, what would you say to them? What research would you do? What small talk would you have at the ready? Do exactly that in the rapport building part of that call. The second mistake I see people do is that they ask one question, something like, what interested you in taking this call today? The person then answers, and then they dive into the pitch. So what I would encourage you to do instead is ask that question. I have tons of thoughts on that question, by the way. You can definitely find them if you follow me on LinkedIn. But ask that first question, listen to the response, and then do what is actually the number one thing your buyers want, which is to ask an active listening question. So if I say to my husband, hey, how was your day? And he tells me, oh, I was really busy, this and that happened, et cetera, et cetera. And then my next question is, what do you want for dinner? I haven't really asked him anything about his day, right? He's just shared all this stuff with me. And instead, I hopped to the next question that I really want to ask, which is obviously, what do you want for dinner? Instead, skip that dinner, think about the answer that they just gave you, and dive into what they just told you. Ask another question. Talk about what those things are that they just shared with you. That is where the value of your discovery call will come from. That's it for today. Shout out to Nelson Boyce for being an absolute joy to speak with and for sharing incredible knowledge from his decades of work in sales. I'd once again like to thank Courtney Garcia, our producer of the show, and Paige Tills. And I want to thank our growing audience who continues to support Sam Sales across all the spaces and places we like to hang. Our theme music is a song called All at Sea by the artist Zenial. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast, and if you want to stay up to date on all events and resources coming from Sam Sales, our newsletter is a great resource for that as well. You can find links in the show notes on this episode. That is all. Have a great day, everybody, and I'll talk to you again soon.